video conferencing platform. However, the city cannot guarantee that the public's access to teleconferencing technology will be uninterrupted, and technical difficulties may occur from time to time. Members of the public desiring to provide comments at the meeting are encouraged to attend the meeting in person. The meeting can be accessed by Zoom using meeting ID 812-0931-0094, and the passcode is 242110. If you wish to join by phone, dial 669-900-6833. Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Sherman is absent. Commissioner Reese? Commissioner Salcido?
Here.
Youth Member Yao?
Here.
Chair Cagle?
Present. All right. This portion of the meeting, item number 2, public communications, is reserved for comment on items not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, the Commission cannot act on items raised during public communications, but may respond briefly to statements made or questions posed, request clarification, or refer the item to staff. At this time, I will open this item up for public comment. Do we have any members of the public wishing to comment on items not on the agenda? Okay. If you're in the audience, please approach the lectern and fill out a speaker card.
We've already done that.
And then if you're joining by Zoom, excellent, thank you. If you're joining by Zoom, please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only. If you would like to provide a comment. When brought in for comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. You will have 2 minutes to provide your public comment. We'll start with our in-person. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Peggy Dodds, and I live in Walnut Creek. I live on Greenway Drive, and I'm here concerning the letter I received this week proposing speed strips, but particularly the circle placement that is supposedly going to be presented. We have the neighbors and myself and other people have joined in. Most of us found out about it, well, very few of us found out about it at all prior. Some of us found out through a letter, and many of us did not find out in any way other than through next door. There was a posting, I guess, on a telephone pole the other day, and we registered I registered complaints that if I can pay taxes and receive a tax bill, I ought to be able to receive a mailed notification of something of this magnitude that impacts our neighborhood to a tremendous amount. I'm glad that there's something that's going to be done to perhaps slow speeders. There used to be a police officer that took care of that, and I thought that that was very effective. We have concerns about the circle placement, what reasoning went into it. Usually speed circles speed up traffic. If it's supposed to slow it down, we don't see the engineering logic of that. It's a 25-mile-per-hour zone. We feel that many of the bumps, there's a tremendous number of bumps that are going to be placed on Walnut Boulevard, that if the bumps are designed where they haphazardly designed, there is a stop sign at Sierra. We're not saying no bumps, but is there a need for that many? And would it still allow for 25-mile-hour zones? Along with the circle, there's a speed bump shortly thereafter at Bradley. There's nothing on Homestead past the Lakewood four-way stop. And why is that? There's also tremendous traffic and speeding in that area. So that seemed to be heavy-handed, again, giving the sense of a haphazard. One last thing was that please notify taxpayers and the stakeholders. We pay for the information.
Thank you for being here tonight. Is there anything that staff would like to respond to as far as this is concerned? Please.
Okay. Can I just ask one other question? When will the study be open for debate or input from the stakeholders, particularly the neighbors?
Great. And can I have Matt Redmond come and he's an associate traffic engineer with traffic engineering. Excellent. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, happy to reply. Matt Redmond, Associate Traffic Engineer. I don't know if we want to do this all as a group. I don't know if we have more comments, but happy to comment on what I heard there. We're trying to improve the street. We're trying to improve safety. Overall goal. Our communication may have not been expert level. We did send letters to those directly adjacent to Walnut Boulevard and Homestead Avenue. So if you are facing that street, directly touching it, you got an in-person letter. The rest, we spammed our email box with as many addresses that we had from other outreach. And then we did the flyers in person. I was informed by one of the residents last Friday when my email went out that the posting was put on Nextdoor by a resident. So we're trying to do our best there and spread the word given the resources. Obviously, we can't email or we can't send snail mail to 1,000 addresses, so we have to be careful there. As for the traffic circle, it is experimental. All this is a pilot. This could be tacked down and then pulled back. The traffic circle, we do believe there's enough space there as from the pilot that we demonstrated. I understand there may be other impacts, but it's considered a horizontal deflection. So you have vertical deflections with speed humps. Horizontal deflections can also slow people down. So that was the goal there. I know traffic can still flow through. And our goal also is if queuing does occur, it's possible that maybe cars won't queue through the traffic circle, allowing a gap for side streets to enter and use that intersection as well. As for the number of bumps, we're open to comments. This is a comment period. There's technically no date right now. We'd like to move forward here in the spring of attacking these down, but this is the comment period. So I appreciate everyone who's given comments thus far, including yours. And the number of bumps is open to interpretation. The segment area is north of Homestead, so that's kind of the area that we're looking at. We can't look at every street in the city, so we're just trying these two streets here because we know certain traffic patterns do use these segments. But yeah, the number of bumps can be used. We do want to see a measurable impact because we have data collection going on with the radar signs. We also have some other data sources. And so we want to see a measurable impact with the number of humps. So we'd rather go with a higher number, and then we can also, remove or not put those permanently in there. And so, curl down. But for now, we'd like to see a measurable impact in terms of speeds. So those are the points for now. Happy to come back for more.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the audience who's here for something not on the agenda tonight? Okay, then we'll go ahead and move to online.
Just quickly, I did want to clarify that anything related to speed humps on Walnut Boulevard or Homestead, that is not an item on the agenda. So if you wish to speak on that item, now is your time. Okay.
All right, great. We'll move on to item number 2. No, I'm sorry, item number 3, the consent calendar. And we'll go ahead and take items A and B together unless anyone on the commission would like to do differently. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the September 15th meeting and then also the January 11th commission meeting?
Before we do that, there are some just minor typos. I don't know if that needs to be corrected for the record if there are typos in the...
We can implement the corrections if that's part of the motion to fix those typos.
Is it something that jeopardizes the content?
No,
Okay.
not really. It's just, it has the wrong name for chair.
Okay.
For me?
Yeah, it has my name instead.
Oh. Heavens, I didn't even notice that, so that's good. Okay, well, we'll get that corrected. Is there anything else? Do I have a motion to then approve those with that correction?
I make a motion to approve the minutes with the correction of the chair's name on page 2.
Great.
Of the September minutes.
Okay.
I'll second for September. Second for September.
We're taking them both up together, I'm sorry.
I wasn't at the
Oh,
January meeting, so I
gotcha.
can't speak to that.
Okay.
Can you get a different? Well, that's okay. I think you can still get a second
Okay.
from Commissioner Reese.
Second.
Oh. We'll go ahead and call the roll then. Commissioner Reese for September minutes.
Aye.
Commissioner Salcido for the September minutes.
Aye.
Chair Cagill for the September minutes.
Aye.
And for the January meeting minutes, Commissioner Reese.
I would abstain.
Okay. Okay, we're not going to be able to pass the or
Right.
approve the minutes from January. That's fine. We can just move it
Bump
to,
it to
to
the
the
next
next
meeting?
Meeting, that's fine.
Okay,
Okay, so the approval of the minutes does not pass.
okay. Deferred to our March meeting when we have a quorum. All right. All right, we're going to go to item number 4. We have 4 items of consideration tonight. The first, we're going to get an update on our city's local roadway safety plan. Please, staff, come on up and give us a presentation.
Evening. My name is Brianna Byrne, and I'm an associate traffic engineer here at the City of Walnut Creek. Tonight, we'll be presenting on the local road safety plan as well as Vision Zero. With me today, I have the consultants helping us on this project, representatives from Fair and Peers. And with that, I'm going to ask them to stand up.
All right. Thanks, Brianna. Thanks, commissioners, for having us here tonight. Wanted to start out this item with talking about Vision Zero and what that means kind of as a concept, and looking at the safety landscape in general as we look at transportation safety. My name is Ryan McLean. I'm a principal with Fair and Pierce. All right, so as I mentioned, the landscape is really changing in how we look at transportation safety. It used to be looking at reacting to crashes after they happened, thinking about what to do after the fact that occurred, and really kind of accepting crashes as inevitable in terms of transportation. So that's changed, and we're now looking at proactive ways to address crashes before they happen, looking at the type of infrastructure that leads to severe and fatal crashes and treating that proactively. So there's several approaches to that are kind of headed in that direction. And so we've got Safe System, which I'll talk about briefly, the local roadway safety plan, which we'll have a larger presentation on a bit later, Vision Zero, and then the Safe Streets for All program. So tied to this change in direction in terms of thinking about safety is also a lot of funding, and that's at every level. That's at CCTA, Contra Costa Transportation Authority, here locally, MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in the Bay Area, state, the Caltrans grants are looking at improving safety, and then at the federal level, really focused on looking at projects, funding projects that are safety related. So diving back into Vision Zero, I want to talk a little bit specifically about that. And really the goal of Vision Zero is to eliminate traffic fatalities and severe injuries. It's not focused on eliminating all crashes. So that zero is for fatal and severe crashes. And so why is there a focus on that? It's really because those are the life-changing events. Obviously, fatal and severe are the ones that really have an impact on people's lives. And there can be changes made that may increase some types of crashes. Say there might be a rear end because a new light went in, but that's acceptable in terms of if that then prevents a fatal injury from, say, a pedestrian crossing that street. So I'm going to walk through the core elements of Vision Zero, and this was put together by a national organization, the Vision Zero Network, that is really taken the lead in promoting this across the US. And so they've identified several core values here. Leadership and commitment. So this is not just a transportation engineer coming out and making these improvements. This is getting buy-in from everybody, say city councils, all the way down through all the different departments of a city, and really working together to improve that safety. So that's the commitment that is looked for when becoming a Vision Zero agency. It also means that there's an action plan with clear goals that are measurable, that show that you're making progress in that. So you can't just say that you're Vision Zero and then say, okay, we're done. It's really about following through on that and making sure progress is being made. It's also about kind of changing the perspective, and that you're not just doing safety projects, but every project starts to incorporate safety elements into it. So every roadway project is an opportunity to improve safety. Safe roads and safe speeds. So you're designing a road for all modes of travel, not just for vehicles to get through as fast as they can. And this is important because we know that the faster the speeds, the more severe a crash, and that's across all modes. It's also important to take a data-driven approach to this. Equity focus is one of the key pieces, so that's equitable across all modes, not focusing on just one. It's equitable across all the demographics. Really important to make sure that this is being applied like agency-wide. It's also tracking collision history. So again, making sure that we're headed in the right direction in terms of improving safety, and then being transparent about that and reporting that out to the public. And then adjusting things if they're not going the right direction. So that's Vision Zero. Safe system is another new direction for safety, but you'll see there's a lot of similarities between this and Vision Zero. So again, zero death and serious injury is a goal of it. Humans make mistakes. Humans are vulnerable. So with those things in mind, how do you start to address safety? And that's responsibility is shared. So everybody, the vehicle operator, the engineer, the police officer, everybody has a shared responsibility in improving safety. Safety is proactive. You don't just wait for a crash hotspot to rise to the top. You address that proactively. And then redundancy is crucial. So humans make mistakes. That means you have to have redundant systems in place to account for that. Zero is the goal. Safe system is how we get there. So again, a lot of similarity to the Vision Zero approach. Also wanted to talk about the Safe Streets for All program. So this is a new program. They went through the first cycle of funding for this already. It's $5 billion over 5 years, and it's divided into 2 pots of money. So you can apply for planning funds, and that's to create an action plan that says this is how we're going to address transportation safety in our jurisdiction. And then once you have that in place, you can apply for implementation funds through this. So that's actually making those changes on the ground and building infrastructure, modifying the roads to be safer. So it can be used for both of those things. So there's several requirements that are tied to the SS4A requirements, and these are them listed out. The bold are requirements that you have to have in place in your action plan, and then the unbold, you have to have 4 of those 6. So it's a little confusing the way they laid it out. But basically, in your action plan, you have to have an analysis of crash data and the contextual factors. You have to identify projects and have a list of those. And then it has to be updated in the past 5 years. So those are requirements for that funding. And then you have to have 4 of these other ones, considering equity, public commitment to reducing that, a task force that meets regularly to review how that's changing, community engagement, and then publicly posted outcomes of this. So if you meet those requirements, you can apply for that implementation funding. Again, a lot of overlap with Vision Zero, with the goal of reducing fatal and severe injuries, ongoing and transparent outreach. So again, just to kind of wrap up this piece, it's moving from the traditional approach of traffic deaths are inevitable. Humans should be perfect and always stop for that pedestrian crossing the street. We try to prevent collisions. Individual responsibility, it's the driver's fault, it's the engineer's fault. Saving lives is expensive. We don't have enough money to do that. Where with Vision Zero, traffic deaths are preventable. We need redundancy because humans do make mistakes. Preventing fatal and severe crashes, focused on those. Doing a systems approach. It's not just one piece or the other. It's not just improving enforcement. It's not just putting in a speed hump. It's doing all of those. And then saving lives is not expensive. There's a lot of things we can do to address this now. So with that, open it up for questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions of commissioners? Or our youth member? Feel free to chime in as well. Jamie, sorry, Commissioner Salcido.
I was wondering if any neighboring or overlapping jurisdictions have pursued any of these strategies, and if they have, when and what has the impact been?
Yeah, so several jurisdictions in the immediate area. Contra Costa County itself has a Vision Zero plan, CCTA as well. City of Lafayette has adopted Vision Zero. City of Concord has as well, not specifically Vision Zero, but safe systems principles. So those are all fairly recent, in the past year or so. Longer term, City of San Francisco and City of Fremont actually has been a big example of that, and City of Alameda. And Terrence, do you have any to report out on how those are progressing?
I would say I would say that for the ones that Ryan mentioned that's been put in place relatively recently, the jury is still out. Usually the idea is that your evaluation comes in a few years, 5 being a popular choice. With San Francisco, with Fremont, those are relatively more established. I believe Fremont just had their 5-year check-in very recently, within the past few years, and there has been some progress made in those 5 years.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Salcido?
Where did it start, and kind of are there examples of cities or other agencies that have adopted this approach that have more of a track record to take a look at?
Yeah, in the U.S., Hoboken, New Jersey was one of the first, and that has had 0 fatalities in going on 5 years, I believe now, on their streets. That's kind of the big example where I would say that's also a really good example of system-wide implementation of this. They had all the residents sign a pledge to drive 25 or less, really embraced the safe systems idea with that. And so that's kind of seen as one of the best examples in the United States.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. I have a couple of questions. The key differences between Vision Zero and, say, what we're doing, is it kind of what's on this slide here? Or what are the key differences between our strategies and what we're doing as a city and the Vision Zero approach?
Yeah, so this really is just kind of an introduction to Vision Zero. What is this policy? What does it mean generally? Just for some background, what you'll see on the next slides are part of the local roadway safety plan, and that local roadway safety plan, it implements the safe system approach, but does not specifically, call out Vision Zero. But again, all these concepts are kind of intertwined, but essentially this is really just background. So the city hasn't implemented any kind of policy related to Vision Zero. This is just for additional context for the local roadway safety plan and just traffic safety in general.
Okay, thank you. And if, have there been examples of people looking at Vision Zero as something to adopt and they decided not to, and what would be the hesitation?
I don't know of any examples of someone looking at it and then not implementing it.
Okay,
Are you aware of any? No.
just curious. Thank you. Okay, if we're done with commissioner questions, we'll move on to public comment. Do we have any? Oh, I'm sorry. We're right. We're partway through the presentation. Please continue. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I'm jumping the gun.
Thank you once again for inviting us here, and we'll move on to the next section of our presentation that deals with specific updates to the city's local roadway safety plan. And as mentioned, there will be additional opportunities for questions. We'll have, I believe, 2 more of these section breaks. So the most recent update we have from the local roadway safety plan is a presentation of the collision profiles we developed as part of this plan. And so these profiles are the most common and pressing contexts by which collisions are occurring in Walnut Creek based on the data we've collected and analyzed. And I believe the commissioners have seen some of these profiles in some capacity, but we're gonna just go through the full list, and we're also gonna show you some of the universe of potential countermeasures we'd like to just present to sort of show you the range of options you have to dealing with these profiles of collisions. And so the collisions that fall into these profiles account for just over 2/3 of all collisions that cause some sort of injury in Walnut Creek, and 78% of all KSI collisions, which are those collisions where someone is killed or severely injured. That's what the KS and I stand for. So with profile 1, we have driving under the influence. You have DUI collisions. As you can see, only 7% of all injury collisions, but they tend to be more severe, so 20% of all KSIs. And the only thing I'll note here is that if you look at the map, it's not really limited to just your downtown area where you might expect to find most of the bars, and then we're not showing this, but looking at the temporal trends, we also noticed that it wasn't limited to late at night. It wasn't limited to just weekends. It's really a all days of the week and sort of all parts of the city problem. So that's just something to keep in mind. And for DUIs, you're really looking at solutions that go beyond roadway design, but just something to keep in mind is that, as Ryan mentioned, about safe system, the idea is that you build in redundancies and you accept that humans will make mistakes and humans may do things that might not be what a traffic engineer would intend, but you still build in those kinds of redundancies into your roadway systems to make them more forgiving. And so there are things you can do to your roadways to even when someone is driving drunk, to sort of lessen kinetic energy when you make that impact. You can make roadway designs that encourage slower speeds, things like that. Moving on to profile 2, this is what we're calling large intersections with slip lanes. So on the map up there, you're calling out sort of the really large intersections in the city. So 4 lanes across and above on both sides, or both roadways that are intersecting that also have slip lanes. You can see significant numbers of collisions occurring at each of those, and also just significant number of collisions overall. 20% of all KSI collisions in the city, 19% of all injury collisions, and almost 1/3 of pedestrian KSI collisions. So when you have a large intersection like this, fast-moving traffic, you have long pedestrian crossing distances trying to get across, and sometimes you're even missing crosswalk legs, so it will tell you to cross on the other side of the street, and that leads to even longer crossing times and more sort of exposure. And with the solutions, you're really looking at beyond just closing that slip lane, you're also looking at other ways to slow traffic down at these intersections, using maybe certain ways to reduce that crossing distance, to break it up into multiple chunks, and also just making those pedestrians more visible as well. Profile number 3 is speeding along large roadways, and this is just looking at vehicular crashes. You have a lot of really wide roadways in Walnut Creek, and that the wider a roadway is, the more conducive it is to a vehicle moving at higher speeds, and that can sometimes happen even despite the presence of maybe a lower speed limit. And so when you look at roadway design, there are certain things you can do to really to design a roadway in a way where drivers intuitively understand that it's sort of a lower speed limit area. Introducing features that really prioritize safety and going at the correct speed rather than maximizing throughput at all times. Profile number 4 is large roadways around downtown. Walnut Creek has a very vibrant downtown as a regional destination. So you have a lot of vehicles. You also have a lot of pedestrians. You also have a fair amount of bicyclists. And when you have all of that mixing together in this small space, but you also have large roadways that look a lot like what they look like outside of downtown, you create a lot of potential for risk as all of these modes mix together. So you can see a sizable chunk of all injury collisions, especially a large chunk of pedestrian collisions are happening along these multi-lane corridors in downtown. And really, they're out of place in many respects when you have something very wide and moving very fast through a pedestrian-oriented area. And these countermeasures are ones that really aim to slow traffic moving through downtown and add redundancy. Again, it's about making that design more forgiving. And you see some of these have already been implemented around downtown in recent years. Intersections with permissive left signals. We all know left turns are the most conflict-prone sort of movement in an intersection. So when you have a permissive left, there's a lot of room for error. People might be confused about when they have right-of-way, when they can proceed. And as the city continues to grow and the traffic volumes continue to increase, that's when you need to consider replacing that permissive with the protected left. There are obviously other ways you can really reduce risk at intersections. Profile number 6 is red light running. You can see a pretty sizable chunk of collisions as well. And this, again, is something that's really more behavioral, more enforcement and education oriented, but they can still be supplanted with certain engineering countermeasures to make the roadways more forgiving. So, for example, when you have those larger warning signs, you have those fluorescent sheeting on the signs. Those can still sort of add some safety into the roadway. Pedestrians in the dark, this is a big one. This is accounting for more than a third of all pedestrian injury crashes in the city, and a significant majority of all pedestrian KSIs are happening in the dark. And most of these are occurring in areas where there technically are street lights, but it's important to understand that no two street lights are comparable. You have newer street lights that might be better at illuminating the sidewalk, but then you have some older ones that are sort of more geared towards illuminating the travel lanes. of the roadway, so the sort of size of the roadway, are comparatively less lit, and spacing can also vary. So, you might have streetlights on that road, but if they're 50, 100 feet apart, then if you're between those lights, you're often still not all that visible. And so these countermeasures not only are geared towards sort of adding illumination either at intersections, along segments, along crosswalks, but also, again, just creating those redundancies, which are especially important at night when visibility is not as high, and that makes it extra important to have those redundancies. It adds to your reaction time. It adds to sort of the room for error. Profile number 8 is pedestrians in residential areas. So this is really getting towards some of these smaller residential streets we see around the city, which might have been built for lower traffic volumes many years ago, but now as the city continues to grow and they're seeing more traffic, you're seeing safety risks associated with sort of those roadways now handling more than perhaps they were designed to. So as an example, you might have roadways that might not be striped, maybe crosswalks that are not striped. Maybe there are signage that are now being obscured by plants because the right-of-way sort of isn't clean of those kind of obstructions as often as they need to. Maybe things need to be signalized. Maybe there needs to be stop signs. Maybe there needs to be sidewalks. But really just looking systemically at some of these sort of lower trafficked streets, collector roads in residential areas that might be missing some of these safety features that now when you build something that might come standard. We have one bicycle exclusive profile. It's bicycles along our wide roadways. So really a lot of the same problems we've discussed with the speeding issue and with the large intersections issue, that there are a lot of large roadways in Walnut Creek, many of which do not have the appropriate bike facilities. So that means either no bike facilities at all, or it might have what is called a Class 2 bike lane, which is just a painted-on bike lane with nothing really separating the bicyclist from general traffic. And at intersections, those bike lanes are designed in a way where the bicyclist kind of has to weave into traffic, and there's conflicts with traffic maybe trying to turn right. And so that traffic mixing is a potential for hazard, but also just having sort of two modes moving at very different speeds without any separation is also a hazard as well. And really the best solution here are additional and improved bike facilities, but it's also improvement to intersections to really clearly delineate where that bike is going to be. And it's also, again, creating roadway design that allows traffic to go slower at the intended speed. And then finally, we decided to separate out Rossmore as a special area for analysis, just because of the unique demographics and features of that community. And so this is what we're calling right-of-way violations. And so in this bucket are signals and signs violations. So if someone doesn't stop for a stop sign, that's a signals and signs violation. You have vehicle right-of-way violations when one vehicle takes right-of-way when they didn't have it. Pedestrian right-of-way violations, so when a vehicle violates a pedestrian's right-of-way, and improper turning violations. So all of those we sort of grouped into one bucket. If you want to think about it as vehicles going when it's not their right-of-way to go. And with all of these, it's a violation in the sense that one vehicle was in the wrong, but it's also important to remind ourselves that we're not dealing with traffic tickets here. We're dealing with injury-causing collisions. So again, like going to the shared responsibility, like it might be someone's fault when it comes to, let's say, insurance purposes, but really the solution here is about finding a way to make the design more forgiving in general. So that might be someone specific's fault, but it's really redundancy built in for the safety of all parties involved. So with that, those were the 10 profiles we found for as part of our analysis for the LRSP. We're going to move to non-engineering countermeasures next, but before that, we'd like another break to take any questions you might have.
All right. Any questions on this presentation? All right. We'll start with our youth member. If that's all right, I'll start at the end. She had her hand up first.
Thank you. So in one slide that you mentioned, collision data covers 2015 to 2021. So is this data still being collected? And if it is it still being accounted for in your solutions?
Yeah, so our data goes from 2015 to 2021, and the rationale for that is we wanted to do the most recent data available. So at the time when we were doing this analysis in mid 2022, the most recently available full year was 2021. And so we did those 2 years, but we also wanted to have 5 full years of non-pandemic data because the pandemic obviously changed a lot of traffic patterns. So it's 5 full years plus the most recent 2 that were available at the time. And
I can add that we do continuously track collision data. That's something that traffic engineering and Walnut Creek Police Department, the police department puts together these collision reports, and so that is entered into a database, and it's constantly updated as soon as we have those reports available.
All right. Thank you. Is that it?
Oh, I also did have one more question. So for your solutions, you mentioned low cost, medium cost, and high cost. So does the cost correlate to the effectiveness?
the cost and effectiveness are 2 different measures. So those are organized based on cost. But then one thing I'll also add is that the way those are grouped are based on sort of the full, quote unquote, full build versions of what those countermeasures would be. So for example, a full build roundabout would be very high cost. But if you're talking about a demonstration traffic circle put in place using, for example, traffic cones, obviously that's not going to be the full cost of the roundabout. So there are low cost, quick build alternatives to a lot of these countermeasures that can be sort of rolled out on a more temporary basis or trial basis, and those will be noted in the report when there are alternatives like that that's available. And no, cost and effectiveness don't necessarily correlate.
All right. Any further questions, youth member Yao?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Reese?
Yeah, looking at the various maps, it is a little overwhelming. And I'm wondering, and you've identified lots of solutions. How do you decide what goes where and when, and how do you bring people along? Because a lot of the solutions you've identified there is a variety of solutions, and yeah, so how do you bring people along, and how do you figure out where to put these countermeasures?
Yeah. I'll first say that there's another section coming up when we sort of discuss more of the implementation piece and how these profiles sort of come together into implementable projects. But I do want to turn it over to
Yeah,
Dar.
sure. So in addition to, talking about more project-specific locations, in terms of deciding what types of improvements need to be implemented, it's completely context sensitive. Sometimes you have a location that you literally just don't have the space in order to accommodate some of these countermeasures. So that's why you kind of have this toolbox of options that may have similar effect in terms of reducing the severity of these crashes. But the other piece to this that really is kind of that critical component about this plan is that you're taking this systemic approach. And so you identify these countermeasures and you can take those and hopefully apply the same types of countermeasures where it fits and where it's appropriate to very similar conditions in other locations. Even if you don't have the crash data to support that, you can recognize that that condition exists and say, okay, actually, we have 2 crashes that were, severe injury at X location. We have Y location that has the same type of setup. It's this many lanes and this many pedestrians and this kind of lighting, and you can apply those same solutions there.
Thank you.
Commissioner Salcido?
Is there a mapping of all of the injury, collisions, and KSIs all together and not split out by collision profile?
Yes, there will be in the full report. And I'm not sure, I believe there was a slide that was presented to the commissioners many months earlier, but
There may have been.
There
I
may
just
have
don't
been.
recall exactly where those dots were from that meeting. But if it's possible to see that all together,
Yes.
that might be helpful. And then I imagine we collect additional demographics on the collision data.
Yeah, collision reports do contain demographic data in it.
I think just one thing to note is that some of the demographic data is collected by the reporting officer on scene. And so sometimes there's a hesitation to sort of rely on that as being fully accurate because it is sort of done at the moment, not really, like parties might not be fully conscious, parties might not be able to respond to questions. So sometimes there's limited information to go off of.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
All right. I had a similar question to Commissioner Salcido around the mapping and because some of these were the same crashes but might have.
Yes.
Right. Okay. One very specific question: why are slip lanes so dangerous?
Yeah, I can say a few things and then looks like, okay. If you think about a typical slip lane in the city, especially at a relatively large and busy intersection, so let's say for sake of argument, Ignacio Valley in California, where you have 2 very large arterials, traffic moving really fast, and you can kind of imagine like how fast someone might be going through straight on a green. And the slip lanes really are not signal controlled in any way. There's no stop sign on them. There might be a yield sign. Sometimes there's not a yield sign. And a lot of drivers will take them really as quickly as they can navigate that turn. And if that, when that angle is not very tight, they can go pretty fast through that slip lane without ever slowing down. And because that slip lane sort of slips out before the actual signal, there's sort of that subconscious understanding as well that, I'm not subject to that signal. I can just go. And that really also goes into part of the subconscious mental calculation you have when you proceed into it, where you're less likely to slow down to the appropriate speed. Mm-hmm. And they're really angled in a way where it's really just conducive to, like, once you get past the turn, you're also merging into the next roadway really easily. And so it's not saying that slip lanes are not appropriate in all cases. And there are ways where you can reconfigure the slip lanes where maybe you still have them and they still serve a need, but the turn's not as sort of freeway ramp-like sort of a merge where you still have to make a turn, and it forces you to slow down a little bit as appropriate.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, any other questions before we move on? Okay, I think we're going to part 3 of our presentation here. Thank you.
So part 3, I'd just like to talk briefly to you about the non-engineering countermeasures and safety partnerships. And obviously earlier when you saw a lot of these were things about putting concrete into the ground, signage up on the poles, and this is really the other side of things, that those infrastructure improvements are needed, were appropriate, but these non-engineering countermeasures are sometimes equally, if not more, important. So the first bucket is education. And so you're reaching out to vulnerable groups like bicyclists, pedestrians, for youth, walking to school, for example. And also, it might be context-based. So, for example, if you implement a major change on a roadway where all of a sudden it's very different from how people are used to driving, that might be an opportunity to send out a flyer or have a public service announcement really to show people how to navigate sort of the newly redesigned infrastructure. Enforcement, over the course of the development of this plan, the PD has been a major stakeholder participating in our outreach and giving us feedback on our ongoing analysis and ongoing planning efforts. But enforcement really can be informed by the findings of this plan, so you can target specific locations, times, or contexts for enforcement. You can have high visibility enforcement tied to those contexts to really drive messages home. And we've also initiated sort of a conversation about just if automated enforcement might be appropriate. Obviously, there's a lot of caveats to that, and no decision is made now, nor will be as part of this plan, but it's just an idea to explore. And obviously, all of these need to be sort of considered with an equity lens. So, for example, if you're talking about automated enforcement, how do you make sure that it's really for the sake of safety as opposed to punitive revenue collection? There's policy changes to keep in mind. So one of them is AB 43, which has been passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. The effects won't fully kick in until 2024. But basically what it allows you to do is the local jurisdictions will have more sort of levity in setting their speed limit rather than being sort of bound by the 85th percentile. Policy changes can also come internally through an internal review of just city standards and policies that might have been, several years old or even decades old, and to make sure those are aligned with safety principles, to sort of institutionalizing and infusing safety into the city's everyday practices. And then you might have other policy changes you want to advocate, for example, programs through schools, programs done on a neighborhood level to slow traffic moving through that neighborhood. Partnering with local businesses, so for example, asking your venues with alcoholic beverages to participate in Safe Ride Home programs, making sure those phone numbers are posted. You can partner with local experts to really address problems you see at hotspots. And then finally, this idea of quote-unquote routine maintenance has a huge role to play when it comes to safety. So One thing we talked about briefly was keeping roadways clear of debris. So that includes both on the roadway surfaces, but also on the sides where it might obstruct the views of either your pedestrians, your signage, or even cross traffic. And then as mentioned before, we have things like tracking crash data, which the city already does, and sharing that information with the public and monitoring progress as this plan moves forward in its development. You have pilot demonstration safety projects like the one you see on your screen. So that's just done with a few sort of rolls of tape and some traffic cones to really demonstrate what a protected bike lane could look like at that location. It's low cost, and it's sort of a great way to interface with the local community to see how they feel. And then finally, another thing that the city already does is rolling safety into maintenance projects. So when you rehabilitate pavement, you're not just repaving the road, you're also considering, do we pave it back to exactly what it was before, or are there things we could fix to make it better? And we have another opportunity to pause.
Any questions from what we just heard? Youth Member Yao.
Yeah, so you mentioned education. Can you give a more detailed explanation on how you plan to educate people, especially the youth?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, like those slides I think can be seen like the sort of library of countermeasures that you saw that accompanied each profile. So it's not committing the city to doing all of them, and it's not saying we should do all of them at all times. It's really doing them as on an appropriate, as needed, and context-sensitive basis, the same way you would put in, for example, a roadway improvement. With that said, an example of where an education program for youth or school-age children might be a good sort of application would be, suppose there's a safety improvement that's put in near a school, and you might want to have sort of a person from the city come in and talk to the kids about, hey, what is this new crosswalk that we put in? How do we operate the beacon that comes with this crosswalk? And that could roll into something more general. It's like, what do you do when you're walking around the city, and what are the steps you need to take to sort of keep yourself safe as a pedestrian navigating the city streets. So education is as much about audience, but it's also about targeting to specific audiences as there are changes in the roadway, and as there are sort of changes in how they might be expected to operate and how to use sort of new facilities, so that you can really get the maximum value for your buck as you implement those changes.
Any other questions?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners? Commissioner Salcido.
What is the efficacy of these types of non-engineering countermeasures?
They vary. So if you think about just a phone number posted at a bar saying, you've drank, don't drive, call this number for a ride. That's a very different efficacy than if a police officer, is posted right at the intersection and giving a ticket to anyone who runs a red light. So it's very dependent on both context as well as sort of the specific non-engineering countermeasure being discussed. You have a more detailed rundown of that in the full text of the report, but it varies greatly.
Yeah, and I think what I'll add is going back to that safe system approach. when we're, in presenting these countermeasures, we have those engineering countermeasures, but then this education enforcement pieces really add to that redundancy that is really critical to that safe system approach.
For the speed limit and the change in policy on that, if the speed limit is reduced on a roadway and without active enforcement, do people actually drive slower if the road is designed to be driven on faster, like just purely based on width and straightness of the road and things like that?
Yeah, it's definitely a concern that people sort of subconsciously have a feel for how fast they should be driving based on what they see, and that can often deviate from what the posted speed limit is, and that's why designing roadways appropriately according to the context is so key. But with that said, it's non-engineering and engineering countermeasures working together. So really, you can't just go with one thing and not the other if the context demands both.
Okay, and
I'll add to that really quick too. I think the other piece of that is that in the past, if you made a change to a roadway that you thought would bring the speeds down, you couldn't change the speed limit immediately. And so you'd have to wait for traffic to adjust and then do another speed survey and then lower the speed limit. So this kind of, again, as you roll out different speed limits, it allows you to kind of do that a bit quicker than you have in the past. So I think it's a useful tool for that.
Great. And one last question is, was there any consideration to programs that would simply reduce vehicular traffic as a non-engineering countermeasure? Is there a reason that isn't one of the suggestions?
So this plan really is focused on improving safety for all the modes. I think there's something to be said that if you provide a safe and comfortable facility for let's say pedestrians and cyclists, then you will see that movement or that shift away from those vehicle trips to those other options, or it makes it a more desirable option instead. So it's not in and of itself, a countermeasure, but these improvements all point to making that comfortable, more desirable option available.
Okay. And I just have a question around AB 43, and I know you touched on it a bit. It makes the process faster, but what is the process? How would one approach adjusting a speed limit on a street?
In simple terms, previously you're sort of bound by the 85th percentile. So whatever 85% of the vehicles on that roadway are traveling at or below, that's your speed limit, or the closest, you would round up to the closest 5 or 10. This AB 43 first and foremost allows you to round down in certain cases. It allows for additional downward setting in certain contexts, for example, business districts or near schools, and it also allows you to set prima facie speed limits to be 25 or 15 in certain specific contexts. And so it just gives you sort of ways where you can deviate from that 85th percentile calculation.
Mm-hmm. And where does that start? Is it a community that says, hey, we're concerned about this speed limit near the school? Is it maybe the city looking at data and bringing it to us as a commission? Or I'm kind of curious procedurally, like how that works.
Yeah, I would still follow the same process for how it's a traffic engineer sets the speed limit for that street. And so it's just that part of that process, instead of just mostly relying on the 85th percentile speed. There's additional flexibility given to the traffic engineer to pull those speeds down based on that additional information, the additional criteria.
Okay, so city staff can do it.
Yeah. And then the other piece is that by having those, they're called speed surveys or engineering and traffic surveys, by having that in place, PD is actually able to enforce and ticket, and those tickets will be upheld in the court.
Okay,
And
thank you.
That's where that 2024 date is from. So starting in, I believe, June of 2024 is when you'll start to be able to have those be enforceable based on new speed limits you set.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions, I'm going to go to public comment. Do we have any members of the public? Oh, we have more presentation. I'm
One more
so
section.
sorry.
One more section.
I'm not rushing you. This is great and interesting.
So I just want to talk briefly about, to Commission Member Reese's question earlier, how we move from those profiles to projects. So the first concept I want to talk through is just project tiers. So we want to have a certain number of projects basically that we like the most to be featured in greater detail in the plan. But outside of those, we also want to have a pool of other projects we want to designate sort of quote unquote tier 2, where they just appear in a project list. And if you recall from the first part of the presentation, inclusion of a project list is a requirement under the federal SS4A program. And so with that, I'll go on to talk about some of the candidates for a potential transformation into a project. So the first thing I have up here is a map of intersections around the city with slip lanes. And you can see there are dots in dark green and light green. The dark green are the dots you saw from profile number 2. So those are the intersections that have slip lanes and are large, sort of 4 lanes or more across on both of the intersecting roadways. And then you have some lighter green dots that are other intersections around the city that also have slip lanes. And so these are candidates for slip lane removal, but also candidates for reconfiguration, for adding bulb outs and median refuges to other part of the intersection. So maybe you keep the slip lane, but you want to add safety improvements to other parts of the intersection to compensate, adding missing crosswalk legs and sort of any other intersection improvements as context appropriate. The second map I want to show are just some of the largest roadways in the city that are outside of that, outside of the downtown core area. So these are your largest major corridors where you can address some of the issues with, for example, bikes, not having proper bicycle facilities that are more protected from vehicular traffic moving at fast speeds. And that kind of goes also to the point earlier about creating facilities that might induce more travel in other modes. Is that, like, if you create these less stressful facilities for people to use, people might see biking or walking as a more viable option when they feel like the places they'll be doing it in are safe. And these are also corridors for safety enhancements to uncontrolled pedestrian crossings. So, obviously they're wide, they're fast moving, and so these are especially the places where without a dedicated signal, a pedestrian might feel very uncomfortable to cross. And so these are also corridors where any uncontrolled pedestrian crossings are due for enhancement. And that again goes to the systemic nature of this process, that we know not every single uncontrolled crossing along these corridors will have a collision history, but we also know that these are locations with safety Then I want to zoom in the map to just the area around downtown. So these are some of the larger corridors around downtown, and what we're talking about here are different options for how to reconfigure and optimize the sort of lane configurations of these roadways. So, for example, on California, it might be providing bike facilities on that very wide right-of-way that are an upgrade over what the existing Class 2s can do for bicyclists. It might be sort of looking at North Broadway, a road diet that turns the sort of underutilized roadway capacity into something more productive. For example, making calming traffic speeds, or potentially providing for bike facilities, and also intersection improvements to make these streets function less as barriers. So if you think about some of the larger intersections in and around downtown, an intersection like, for example, Civic and Broadway, even though it's right in the heart of downtown, it can seem pretty intimidating for a pedestrian to cross because of just how long that crossing distance is and how many lanes of traffic you have to get across. And we have several, as you can see in the map, we have several of those corridors going right through downtown, and that really sort of divides up downtown into sort of smaller areas where travel between them seems more daunting than they have to be. And also keeping in mind that Iron Horse Trail sort of runs on the east side of downtown, and it's a very popular facility, very well used, but one of the consistent pieces of feedback we heard over the course of developing this plan is that the trail is great, but how do you get from the trail to downtown, even though it's such a tiny distance, but there's sort of very few facilities where it feels safe and comfortable to do so. So those are some of the candidate corridors in downtown for any/all of these improvements. And then finally, here are some sort of miscellaneous improvements that more or less align with the pedestrians in residential areas profile, but also they're not sort of limited to just pedestrian improvements. So obviously there's the Newell Avenue project that the city has previously studied, and this is now also on CCTA's radar as a potential sort of component of a wider Olympic Boulevard project that is multi-jurisdictional, so that's in the works. There's Walnut Avenue, so a section of Walnut Avenue near where the CC Canal Trail crosses it, so improving crossings there, both for the canal trail, but also for the other pedestrian crossings along that section. And then you have Montego right off Ignacio Valley, reconfiguring a very wide roadway that is significantly wider than what capacity it's serving. And those are some of the preliminary project candidates. Open it up for questions to you and also to the public.
All right, any questions? Commissioner Salcido?
Just an overall question on, we're providing, eventually we will be providing feedback on what you've presented. Will this eventually turn into like a more formal plan document that will, and what will that process be for adoption?
Yeah, so we've been bringing this document kind of in chunks as updates just to, I don't know. I think it's a lot of information, so the little chunks, we're just getting better feedback through it, so that when we come to you with this draft local roadway safety plan, which we're hoping we can bring in March to you. It will be this full plan that contains all of the previous content that we've shown you, incorporated feedback from you, other stakeholders, and then also, you know, from tonight. And then we would be looking for a recommendation from the Transportation Commission for City Council to adopt this plan. And so, you know, depending on timing and your feedback on the draft plan, going to council ideally sometime, hopefully in late spring, early summer.
Okay. No other questions? I don't have any questions. And you're sure you don't have any more presentations? I don't want to cut you off this time.
This
Okay.
is the last slide.
Okay. All right. With that, then, we will now take public comment. Are there any members of the public wishing to provide public comment? Looks like there's one. For those in the room, please fill out a speaker card and approach the lectern. If you're joining us by Zoom, please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you are connected by audio only. If you would like to provide a comment, when brought in for comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. You will have 2 minutes to provide your public comment. And when we're ready,
Different location than normal.
welcome.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Laura Pacha, use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman with brown hair wearing a green cloak and red glasses today. I just want to say thank you for doing this report. It's been great to read and listen to. I think it's really important that we're considering pedestrian and bike safety. You know, we're not really a small little suburb anymore. We're kind of becoming a big city, and that means that we need to adjust our roadways to city type of infrastructure. So I really like all of the low-cost proposals. In terms of some of the medium-cost ones, those left or the right slip lanes that we were talking about during the presentation, I ride an electric scooter and have gotten in near accidents multiple times, all from those kind of lanes, because people don't really see the pedestrians, and as a scooter or a bike will go faster, they tend to be in the way from a driver perspective. So I like this adjustment to the safety of pedestrians and bikers who are more vulnerable than the people in vehicles. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for being here. Is there anybody else in person? All right, another person here.
I was actually here for another item, but I wanted to add my comments on this too. My name is Erin Cox. I live in the Park Bean neighborhood of Walnut Creek. I walk to work, which is across the street from BART, every day from Park Bean. And I'm very happy to hear about the slip lanes because they're terrible. The cars are going so fast through them, and they just don't stop for pedestrians. You could be standing there staring right at them. It doesn't matter. So I'm very happy to hear that you're looking at downtown improvements. I'd also like to say that I would be very interested in riding my bike to work, but there's no way for me to get home safely between 4 and 5 o'clock going down California Boulevard. It's just not going to happen on a bike. So if there are, and the Iron Horse Trail, again, you have to ride on the sidewalk on Ignacio out of your way to get to the Iron Horse Trail to then go down. So if there are ways that can improve bike safety for the western side of downtown, I'd appreciate it. That's all. And I'll come back again. I don't need another card for the next one, right? All right.
Thank you. All right, any others in the audience? Okay, we'll look to Zoom.
We have one member of the public wishing to comment on Zoom, and Eric. Okay.
Hello, my name is Eric Owens. I am a citizen of Concord. At the beginning of COVID, I really stopped driving my car and started using my bike as a primary means of transportation. I have ridden pretty much on every major street in Walnut Creek. I regularly ride my bike sort of on the edge of Walnut Creek, taking my son to Pleasant Hill Middle School. So I ride on Bancroft at Mayhew and then onto the Iron Horse Trail multiple times per week. I also will ride my bike down Oak Grove to the Whole Foods shopping center. The plan sounds fantastic. It's everything that I think the city needs to really progress. When I first moved here 10 years ago, to the region 10 years ago, I was really surprised by these 15-foot concrete walls and highways that are built in the middle of Walnut Creek and Concord. And we really need to get these long straight streets that people just drag race up and down as much as they can. I would really love to see protected intersections at Treat and Bancroft, Walnut and Ignacio, protected intersections at the Ignacio and Oak Grove, as well as protected bike lanes on Ignacio Valley Road and Bancroft. It's until we can getting those things, I believe, will actually reduce traffic because it will incentivize people to get out of their cars and walk and ride bikes. I'm out of time, so thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. Any others online?
No, we do not have any other members of the public wishing to provide comment.
Okay. Are there any comments from commissioners? Youth Member Yao?
I really like how this plan is proactive instead of reactive, and I think it is very important to take measures to prevent accidents in the first place rather than try to repair the damage done after the accidents have already happened. And I personally bike to school every day, so I feel that a lot of the solutions listed, such as the protected bike lanes, will really benefit me and other people. So thank you for this.
Great, thank you. Other comments? Commissioner Reese?
Yeah, great presentation, thank you. And I agree with Youth Member Yao, exactly what she said. I think you brought up towards the end of the presentation, you brought up Montego, as a wide street. And I think that actually street has it's a good story. There was some curb extensions that were designed many years ago on Montego, and the decision was made to have the width between the curb extensions be 28 feet, to have two 14-foot lanes so that cars could go by at speed, 30 miles per hour, because we didn't want to cause a crash. But it's also a location where we have pedestrians crossing the street. And so we made some design decisions that were driven to car-centric solutions, and it's great to hear that we're getting away from that. And I look forward to seeing more of the more proactive, progressive ideas for safety. But I think that it also illustrates something that might be missing, and that is design speed. I didn't see anything in here regarding design speed, but the idea, historically, civil engineers have designed roads. If they expect the speed limit to be 35 miles per hour, they design the road to be for 40 or 45 miles per hour because they say that's safer. When in fact it's actually less safe. And so I'd like to see, if it's appropriate in the plan, a focus on design speed and really helping educate both the community that live and work in Walnut Creek, but also the civil engineers that are designing our roads, get them to rethink what a safe design speed is for a particular road. And that not only applies for corridors, but it applies to the slip lanes, it applies to putting in bike facilities, it applies to, as I mentioned, curb extensions to try to narrow the road down. I think it would be great if we could have some focus on design speed and reset expectations, what Walnut Creek expects of their community. And then the other item that I'm not sure if it fits in with the LRSP or if it fits in with maybe broader policy documents, but it's the idea, it was brought up by members about connectivity. Maybe if things were connected better, they would ride their bikes. If there was a continuous bike facility, they would use their bike rather than drive. And I don't know if it fits into the LRSP, but it would be nice if we could start to educate the community about the benefits of connectivity. We've seen that a lot. For example, in the city of Oakland, 10, 15 years ago, they had pretty low bicycle usage. And then they started to connect their bike network so that you could actually walk or bicycle from one neighborhood to the next in a protected facility or even in a bike lane. And they started to see big increases in bike utilization because riders felt safer. The roads were being redesigned to benefit safety around bicycling, and people started to get out of their cars. And so I don't know if connectivity fits with the LRSP, but it would be nice if we start to integrate that into our language moving forward with our transportation projects. And those are my comments on the LRSP.
Commissioner Salcido.
I also want to add my thanks to staff and the consultants for the great work that's gone into this. I think there's been a lot of thoughtful analysis, and I think it's really exciting to see sort of the toolkit of things that we can do to improve safety and address some of these hotspots in different parts of the city of Walnut Creek. I do want to build on what Commissioner Reese was talking about with connectivity, because that is a huge barrier for me personally in choosing whether or not to drive or take my bike from where I live in sort of the Northgate area to the downtown area or to Walnut Creek BART. And like I will take the long way to be able to get on the trail and avoid Ignacio Valley Road as much as possible, but that's not possible after dark when the trails are closed, and there are all these gaps and hiccups that just make it very difficult to get from point A to point B for me in certain parts of the city. So I think that even with improvements to intersections and specific high-volume roadways that experience a lot of the traffic incidents, it still is difficult if there aren't critical connections, and YVR is one of those major roadways where we do have a lot of problems and just challenges crossing at intersections if you're not in a vehicle, because there aren't always crosswalks on all sides of the intersection. And I do think that ultimately, if we can't move more people to alternative modes of transportation, we're still going to continue to have major issues with safety, because really the culprit in these KSIs are vehicles. It's not pedestrians who are killing drivers in cars. It's the cars that are killing pedestrians, bicyclists, and other motorists. And so that's something that's really important to me, is how do we get more people to take other forms of transportation that don't require a single occupant vehicle. And because it's also hard just being a motorist and sitting in deadlocked traffic, and that can be frustrating, which probably does not help with improving safety on the roadways. So that's just adding on to that connectivity piece. But I do think that there are some great suggestions. I do love the idea of the protected intersections in particular. I recently saw an example from a friend of in a protected intersection in Alameda on a roadway that was particularly problematic with a lot of speeding, and it looks really great, and it just looks appealing and safe from the perspective of a pedestrian or a bicyclist. And I do also, so in addition to the Transportation Commission, I also serve on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. And so I do think that the more that we can look at all of our policies and plans from an equity perspective and with an equity lens, I think that only benefits all of us. And people of color do tend to suffer more harm from traffic-related KSIs and traffic-related collisions as pedestrians and bicyclists, and are also more harmed by enforcement activities around traffic-related issues. And so I do hope that we can have a leaning toward more of the engineering solutions than police enforcement where it's possible. And it also seems like a more permanent solution because when an officer is not there, the impact of that type of enforcement sort of goes away. And especially in light of what's happening in the world and what we're seeing with Tyree Nichols and Keenan Anderson, I just think it's important to really consider the unintended consequences of some of these solutions that could have a disparate impact on vulnerable communities. And I do think that California is an important street that we heard some commenters at a prior Transportation Commission meeting who were concerned about an intersection. I believe it might have been California and YVR or somewhere around that area. And it does seem just with this mapping that is an area of concern. So really focusing on that seems important, especially given there's a lot more housing and that's where our businesses are. And I'm sure there are economic development impacts of safety as well. So thank you.
All right. Any other comments before I go? All right. I'll keep it pretty brief. I appreciate all that my fellow commissioners have said this evening. I do have concerns around permissive left turns as well. They're probably as serious as the slip lanes, honestly. I've seen so many close calls being a pedestrian in this city of people practically getting hit in a crosswalk or people turning into cars that have the right of way to turn right, you know. So I do have significant concerns around those, so I hope that is brought up to a little bit more prominent level. I agree about the connectivity piece. I think if you build it, they will come. The California YVR intersection is a really great example. It's also a place where people are entering our city through BART or through other means, maybe you know, getting off a freeway or something like that. So it needs to be welcoming and feel safe, and it will be welcoming if it feels safe. So I think that's a very important intersection there. Also agree on the equity piece and, you know, moving forward, and not moving forward in our agenda, but we're going to be talking about the city council priority setting, and I know that that's something included there, so I do hope that that becomes a standard for projects in our community moving forward. And then last, there was also some conversation around this being everyone's responsibility, right? And there's an education piece in here, which I think is fantastic, and there's signage pieces and things like that, but what isn't in here is pedestrian signage, and I think that there's a way that we can use pedestrian signage to make pedestrians and those on wheels be more mindful in traveling as a pedestrian in our community. I've seen it in other communities, and it literally made me think twice about making eye contact with drivers as a pedestrian. So I think, you know, mindfulness for all of the traveling public is very important, and I think that includes pedestrians, and maybe that could be one of the options or elements that's in there for improvements. So I'll end it there. I think that's it. Thank you very much for the presentation and all of your work on this. It's really appreciated. It's a monster of a project, and I can't wait to get it solidified and work on it further to make our community safer. Okay. So we're going to move on to item B. This is an item for consideration, the North Main Street multimodal improvements. And staff, please give us your presentation.
Okay, good evening, commissioners. My name is Madar Boardman. I am the traffic engineer for Walnut Creek, and I will be speaking to you about the North Main Street multimodal improvements this evening. And this does not work. There we go. Okay, so just some context. So the North Downtown Specific Plan was adopted in 2019, and the plan really speaks to the transit-oriented nature of the area. That's where it's very near BART. So it's this transit-oriented type of land uses. It's a bit denser. It also speaks to these multimodal connections. So creating those connections that we were just talking about, but specifically in this area, and making sure that those are actually high-quality pedestrian and bicycle connections as well. And then one other piece from that is that those types of high quality facilities truly, those are the types of improvements that you're going to see generally as you redevelop an area. And so that's what this plan spoke to, was encouraging implementation as we redevelop parcels along, within this plan area. So specifically, we're going to be talking about North Main Street between Parkside and California. I have another map to kind of show that split. But then just again, looking at, okay, well, what kind of parcels are we dealing with, the lot sizes? This location in particular, they're quite constrained. They're fairly small lot sizes, especially along the west side of the street on North Main. And it's underutilized land. So some existing conditions, and sorry if this map is a little too small, but north is to the left on the screen, and North Main Street is running left-right. Parkside Drive is on the left side, so if you keep going left, which is north, you're going towards the freeway, and then if you go right, then you're going towards BART and the downtown. And so we're really, again, looking at North Main Street between Parkside and where this split occurs, where North Main and California split off. So the existing cross-section, we've got 4 lanes of traffic as you come down North Main past Parkside. And then once you hit the BART tracks, or where that California split happens, you've got 2 lanes that go down along North California, and then 2 lanes that continue on along North Main. And then right now we have, it's anywhere between 6 and 10 feet of sidewalk, depending on which part of this segment you're on. And then we have a median, except for there's kind of this added little split area at the North Main California split, where the BART tracks have a column in the middle of the street. Okay, so the cross-section concept, according to the North Downtown Specific Plan, shows these same 4 lanes and includes that multimodal connection. And so now you're seeing a little bit of landscaping area, 8 feet for 2-way direction traffic, so for bicycles, and then 6 feet really dedicated to pedestrians. And something I wanted to call out here, actually there's 2 things. One, we were just talking about design speed and how we can implement safety improvements as we're making improvements to the street or to the roadways. And so some of these travel lane widths are actually quite wide. They're really supportive of faster moving vehicles. And that's not to say that California or North Main are residential in nature. They're not residential streets. We have a mix of different types of land uses here. But, having something that's as wide as a lane on a freeway may not necessarily be necessary at this location. And so one thing, though, that I did want to point out is in that little dotted box, there is a call out for a 10-foot setback. So what this means is that the properties along this street, on this west side of the street, would actually need to dedicate 10 feet of right-of-way for helping to build this, this pedestrian and bicycle high-quality connection. So some of the issues here is that, again, these lot sizes are really small, so it can lead to a lot of issues as redevelopment opportunities come up. And if we want to actually get this facility in place as was adopted in this North Downtown Specific Plan, this concept, how can we optimize this cross-section? So staff took a look at this and actually, I'll go back. And we were kind of just like, well, do we need all the lanes? let's just start there. Where can we reallocate some of this right-of-way, this space that we already have, just to give that better opportunity for development? So we did, we had a consultant do a quick traffic analysis on this. And so instead of, the 4 lanes that I was talking about in that cross section, well, what if we just brought it down to 3 lanes? And what does that mean? And so the main effect here that traditionally we would analyze is what is the impact to the intersection? So the intersection that would be impacted is Parkside and Main. And at that intersection, you can see there's what we call lane configuration in this box. So on the top left, it says it shows the 4 lanes. So this is at Parkside and North Main coming southbound. There's 4 lanes, and then one of those lanes, the rightmost lane, is where you can also make a right turn maneuver from there, but you can also go straight through the intersection. And then there's also 2 left turn lanes. This 3-lane configuration would actually change that that North Main approach headed southbound at Parkside, so that rightmost lane is just a right turn lane. It's dedicated as a right turn lane. And so what the findings were that based on existing traffic volumes, which are it's kind of like a 2019-ish time period. Just to nerd out a little bit here, we traditionally, when doing traffic analysis, you use typical conditions, and the pandemic really had a substantial impact on how traffic volumes function, or like how people travel. And so this is based on what 2021 conditions would have been if maybe the pandemic didn't happen. So that's our existing conditions. And then as compared to 2040 traffic volumes, where you're projecting the increase in population, it accounts for the North Downtown Specific Plan build out. So that density increase, the additional housing in the area, commercial space. And so you can see here that under these conditions, you see some very marginal increases in the amount of delay at the intersection, so less than a second during the morning periods for the existing conditions and for those future conditions. And then in the PM, you actually see a decrease in with this 3-lane, with the 3 travel lane option, and that's really because when you have a condition where you have a shared straight, like a through shared right turn lane. Let's say you have pedestrians who are crossing, those people who want to turn right, who want to proceed straight on through the intersection, have to wait for that person who's waiting to turn right for, a pedestrian who's crossing. So you're essentially just giving additional space here. And since we have fairly high volumes, making this right turn maneuver, because they're headed towards BART or towards the freeway, the other side of town, it's actually just a more conducive lane configuration, period. So we are proposing a cross-section that looks similar. We still have those 6 feet of sidewalk dedicated to the pedestrian space, the 8 feet for two-way bicycle flow, and then, an area that's either going to be plantings or, could be parking meters or other street furniture. And then instead, we'd have 3 travel lanes, and then now we could actually accommodate on-street parking, which would support some of the residential that may be developed along this corridor. So that could be helpful. Or as it could also serve as loading zones. We do have quite a bit of automotive loading and who are currently using that lane anyway for loading and for parking. So this would just kind of help support those types of activities. And now I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Reese?
I may have missed it, but there's the building setback you said is 10 feet with your proposal. Are you keeping that 10 feet, or are you giving that 10 feet back to the property owners since those properties are so narrow?
Yeah, so the intent is that now there would not need to be a 10-foot dedication, right-of-way dedication. So the property line will stay at the property line, and so they don't lose 10 feet of their frontage.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Did you have something, Youth Member Yao? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, because there's only 3 lanes out of 4, there's also like a gap between the bike lane and the car lane, so the bike lane will also be protected as well?
Yeah, so the North Downtown Specific Plan really did call for these high quality bike facilities and pedestrian facility. I'm gonna move back to that cross section to show you, but the bike facility would be at the same elevation as the sidewalk, and so it's just like a really wide sidewalk, but it would have used paint and signage to really indicate that space is being used for bicycles as opposed to pedestrians.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right. I'm sorry, I want you to back up and clarify the parking element. You said we would add parking for potential residents down the line or even for the businesses, and where exactly would that be? In looking at this picture, I don't see it clearly.
Yeah, so actually on this slide right here, can you see? Yeah, you can see my mouse. Great. So this 8 feet right here could be used along the curb, would be used as that parking or loading for public use.
Okay, so that's not the right turn lane.
No, this is just the segment itself. I don't have a picture showing the modification at the intersection.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you. Okay. That's it with questions? Okay, yeah. At this time, is there any public comment? Doesn't look like there's any in the room. Is there any online?
There's no members of the public wishing to provide comment.
Okay. Then at this time, we'll take commissioner comments. Any commissioner comments? Commissioner Reese.
This is super exciting because I have ridden and driven North Main Street, and this is a good example of where we need to rethink our planning documents and how we think about transportation. You're ending the project at Parkside because that's where the specific plan ends, but you have an opportunity to take that same concept and carry it along the hotel. You have 4 lanes there. You don't need all 4 lanes. You could get by with 3, which means you could take your separated bikeway that you have south of Parkside, and you could continue it up over the freeway and connect it to San Luis. And all of a sudden, then you've opened up the greater Larkey Park neighborhood to be able to use their neighborhood streets, come down San Luis, enter a protected facility, and come all the way down to BART, or continue further down into downtown. And it's a really good example of we need to think further into the future and look for these opportunities to make these connections. I think the project is great. It's definitely needed, and it can easily be extended up to San Luis and connect that neighborhood with a protected facility all the way into downtown. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you, Commissioner Salcido.
I love the protected bike lanes in the cross section, and something that would be interesting to consider. I feel like it's still a bit conceptual since we're still waiting to actually develop some of these parcels, but it would be nice to consider intermittent sections of that 8-foot width of parking for maybe extending some landscape or seating areas. Maybe there's, a cafe that wants to be in one of these new developments at the ground level, and there could be sidewalk seating accommodated if you were able to use some of that additional right-of-way that is sort of designated in that cross-section for parking, could be used for other purposes intermittently, potentially. But I think it's a great improvement to what exists today.
Any other comments? All right. I think this is a fantastic project. With some people getting off the freeway in that general area, I think you get off the freeway with that freeway frame of mind, and people are still going kind of fast. So, helping control that a little bit better, I think will be really helpful for the neighborhood as well. I've been really excited about the North Downtown specific plan since it started. And I think given the way that neighborhood is set to evolve, this just promotes safety in the neighborhood, and hopefully those future residents and people who are going to be coming in for conferences or meetings or what have you will just feel safer in our neighborhoods and be safer. So I think it's fantastic. Thank you for your work. Okay. So we are rolling along. We are going to move to item C. Oops. This is an item for consideration, the OBAG 3 grant application update. Staff, please give us an update.
Okay. Evening again. So my name is Brianna Byrne, and I'm an associate traffic engineer here at the City of Walnut Creek. Tonight, we're going to be bringing forth kind of an update to this OBAG 3 cycle grant, which we applied to back in July. So we got some money. The project was the Safe Routes to School infrastructure application. It was for 6 projects near schools all throughout Walnut Creek. We had asked for just a little under $8 million, and we got close to 2.5. So going over, we're gonna just discuss about this grant, about this application, what got us to this point, followed by the intended project that we plan to use the $2.5 million for, and then the next steps and where we're going from here. So as a quick refresher, there were 6 projects throughout the city. Starting from the northwest, we had Alvarado Avenue. This is just north of Buena Vista Elementary, and it was a sidewalk gap closure. To the south of Buena Vista was a Parkside sidewalk gap closure. Then we had WCI, Walnut Creek Intermediate. There is a portion of missing sidewalk, as well as a potential crosswalk improvement. Then on the top right corner there, we have Walnut Acres. There's a portion of Cedar Lane that is missing sidewalk infrastructure as well. Looking at the lower left is the intersection improvement of Broadway Newell, and that serves both the Las Lomas High School as well as Walnut Creek Intermediate, which also has direct trail access. And then the last one here on the list was the Walnut Heights sidewalk gap closure. That is currently in design, so we were requesting funds for construction. And again, we had requested right around 8, and we got 2.5. So the first thing we did when looking at how much money we had and how much each of these would cost was just a price breakdown of each. Alvarado Avenue was more, and then the remaining 4 were less, and the Broadway Newell was exactly $2.5 million. We had considered doing more than one location, and it was ultimately determined not to be an effective use of funds. These are federal funds, so there's extra time needed for reporting, and with more project locations, it just became kind of an impractical use. So we are moving forward with the Broadway Newell. So to go over the issues at this intersection, there's a lot of active modes. So right on the northeast corner and on the southwest, we have that black dash line. Those are the Iron Horse Trail connectors. To get between each of those, you have to cross two different crosswalks. There's that safety aspect, talking about these slip lanes. We have that northbound right slip lane. With large intersections, there's large crossings and long cycle lengths. So there's just an excess delay here. It's a busy intersection. There's a lot of great destinations nearby. There's the school, which again, this is for Las Lomas High School and Walnut Creek Intermediate. And again, these key destinations. So this is kind of a concept level. So what are we looking to do here? Reduce the intersection size, remove some through lanes, install bulb outs, and modify the signal equipment. And that would be to do what's called a PED scramble, where we'd have a direct connection for this Iron Horse Trail connector. And along with that, we'd be removing this channelized right turn lane. And here's some of the benefits that we discussed in part of our grant application. And we'll just be going over kind of 3 of these in more detail. With the first, we'll talk about some school, the regional impact that this intersection has, and then the reduced delay for active modes. So the first slide here, we are currently in the middle of doing a safe routes to school study. So we were out here observing Las Lomas High School November 16th. What you see kind of in this larger picture on the left, you have a group of kids waiting to cross north, and then just on the left side there and zoomed in, you can see a group of kids that have already crossed. And again, this is that slip lane. This is a tiny pork chop island where we have pedestrians and bicyclists all crammed into that one little location waiting to get to the Iron Horse Trail. And now that same group of kids that were waiting to cross, they've now crossed in the picture on the far side. And you can see it's grown in size. Even though that's quite a large corner, you still have a very large group of kids, and it's mixing with pedestrians and cyclists. And they're all trying to cross and get to that northeast corner where the Iron Horse Trail is. And then, so WCI, it's a little over a mile from this intersection, but that's considered acceptable biking distance. So WCI has a direct access gate to the Iron Horse Trail. And when we were out there in late October, this is completely best guess, because if you can imagine the amount of kids flooding out of a gate over 5 minutes, it was kind of hard to count. But it was about 2/5 of the entire student population accessed the Iron Horse Trail from that back gate. with about 50 of them being bicycle and scooter users. And then the photo there, we have some students walking towards the Newell Avenue Broadway intersection. So the other item, so we talked about schools. There's a lot of attractions. The downtown Walnut Creek is very, very active. We have the Kaiser Hospital near here. And it's kind of a little bit out of the view, but in that southeast corner, there is a Kaiser staff parking lot. So they will park there and then they'll walk to Kaiser. Broadway Plaza is right near there. There's the grocery, there's the Whole Foods there, office, residential. It's really a key intersection in a regional and local sense. So we had done some operational analysis as part of a larger Newell Avenue corridor study that looked at possibly removing some lanes in each direction to add bicycle facilities. That project is separate than this. The funds that we received from this grant can only be used at this intersection, but we were still able to use the analysis done as part of that study. So what's currently existing in terms of vehicle delay is what's considered C, is an acceptable 25, 30 seconds of delay. With only these lane changes, so again, we're re-optimizing what's available in the roadway capacity. And there's a very slight increase, but again, it's still operating at this level of service C, an acceptable level. Once we add this ped scramble, and if you think about it in terms of improving pedestrian delay, it makes sense that we're seeing an increase in vehicle delay because we're adding a dedicated pedestrian phase of however long it takes to cross. So and there's a little summary at the bottom. So while it decreases automobile level of service, it's a safer, easier, at-grade crossing for a regionally significant trail. So I guess what are the next steps? So authorizing the project, the city is going to add it to our TIF, our traffic impact fee project list, as well as add it to the capital budget. So while we did get funds for this, the city has a matching percentage of 11.47%. So it's a little less than $300,000. So that's where the budgeting comes in. And then engaging with stakeholders. So there's major employers in the area, Kaiser, Broadway Plaza, residents in the area, the Los Alamos High School. Again, this is serving the students. We have local advocacy groups, Bike Walnut Creek, Bike East Bay, CCTA, and Iron Horse Trail Corridor Advisory Committee. We've been in communication with both of them and would continue to do so as part of this effort. And with that, open it up to questions and comments.
Okay. Are there any questions from commissioners? Youth Member Yao.
So since you only received $2.5 million out of the $8 million that you originally asked for, do you plan to seek more funding or cut back on some of the plans?
So yeah, the projects that we are not able to fund through this, we're still going to continue seeking funding, whether that's through grants or budgeting into our capital improvement or TIF project lists.
Any further questions?
Oh, that's all. Thank you.
No? Okay. One question from me. In the picture of the scramble, will it be an X scramble or just the connecting the Iron Horse Trail? Maybe that's a stupid question, but I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, so this is concept level.
Okay.
That's something we can absolutely consider because during that scramble phase, the peds and the bikes can go anywhere throughout that.
Yeah. Okay. Just curious. Thank you. All right. We'll open it up to public comment. Any members of the public wanting to make a comment on this? I see one in the audience. Please approach and submit your speaker card. And then if you're joining by Zoom, please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only. If you would like to provide a comment, when brought in for comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to provide your public comment. Go ahead, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, again, my name is Erin Cox, Walnut Creek resident, and I wanted to say that I strongly support this project. My son rode his bike from the Parkmead neighborhood to WCI his entire time there, so he had to navigate this intersection. My husband rides his bike from our house to his work near Pleasant Hill BART and navigates this intersection every day using the trail. And it's a difficult intersection when there's a lot of traffic. It's especially difficult trying to cross from the, I guess that's the northwest side by the parking garage toward the Whole Foods, I guess. I'm directionally challenged. I don't know which way that is. The cars that are turning right from Broadway to Newell, again, tend to not look to the right before they turn. So if I'm on my bike, I will not cross that intersection at that corner. I will go around, even if I miss a light, because that corner is difficult. And if any driver has had the misfortune of trying to turn right during the time that the Los Lomas kids are crossing, you could sit there for 2 light signals because you can't go on the green because they're going one way and you can't go on the red because they're going the other way. So I think eliminating that tension would be a great project, and I strongly support it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Is there anyone on Zoom?
Yes. Let's go ahead and bring in Eric.
All right, Eric, welcome. You have 2 minutes, please.
Hello, Eric Owens here again. I have recently been on the Pleasant Hill traffic committee meetings, as well as have attended many of the BPAC meetings for Concord, as well as Concord City Hall. It is very heartening to hear that all of you are actually cyclists and advocating for things that make it easier to cycle in your city. I have ridden through that intersection, so thank you all for that, and thank you all. It's sort of, for me, a bizarro world to be on here and to hear the commissioners all talking in support of adding protected bike lanes and things of that nature. So thank you very much. I've ridden through that intersection numerous times on trips up and down the Iron Horse Trail, and this, I think, is an absolutely fantastic idea to implement that change, and it seems like it'd be something that helps, members of the community as well as the students. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else on Zoom?
Yes, we have Christopher.
Okay, let's bring Christopher in. Christopher, you have 2 minutes.
You guys hear me?
Yes. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christopher.
Yeah, Chris Morris. I'm a City of Walnut Creek resident. I live in the Parkmead neighborhood, which is the neighborhood at the end of Newell as you cross under the freeway. I got 3 kids. I think this is probably a pretty good idea. I do have some concerns. I'll play devil's advocate a little bit as I drive through there frequently. At 3 o'clock, it's already pretty bad for pickup. I'm looking at these traffic lane configuration, and I'm having a difficult time sort of imagining what that's going to look like. Level of service E, looking it up, it says traffic is operating at or near capacity, and there's little to no room for drivers to maneuver between lanes. Any changes such as merging vehicles will cause upstream disruption. I guess I'm wondering, how far do you think this backup is going to extend at those hours down Newell? Is it going to impact traffic at, say, Main Street? Is it going to get all the way down to California? And the other question is, will you be able to take a right on red? Let's say you're coming down Broadway south, and the scramble is engaged. Are all right turns nullified while that's engaged, or if it's clear, are you allowed to turn right? Those are just a couple of thoughts I had. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Does staff want to address any of that?
Yeah, so the easy question here first is the right turn on red. It would be similar operation to what's at Olympic and Main, kind of right side the Apple store. So when the scramble's initiated, there's no right turn on reds allowed. That would be part of the design. As for peak school traffic, yeah, the LOS results we were looking at was PM peaks, like 4 to 6. School traffic is it's an interesting peak scenario that happens at pretty much every school and is gone within, 15 to 20 minutes. We are doing the Safe Routes to School study, so we are looking to improve kind of the flow of traffic around that high school. But one thing to consider is, this is thinking about local road safety plan. It's a safety improvement targeted for the vulnerable roadway users, which in this case is the pedestrians and the bicyclists.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from, or any other public comment online?
Yeah, we have Danny.
Okay. Is there a tech difficulty, perhaps?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a there it
There
is.
we go.
Mhm.
Oh, Danny, we know Danny. Hi, Danny, you have 2 minutes.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on. This is, as one of the other commenters said, this is great to come to these types of meetings where the staff has something great to present and the commission is woefully behind it. And it's just like, it's so great. I agree that there's going to be some compromises that have to be made to make sure this all happens, but the goal of making it safe as possible for the students who are going to school, that has to maintain our sense of our objective, our priority here. And so, it's going to be a challenge as everybody's going to want these compromises, but we have to stay focused on that. Otherwise it's just going to come out with it's a little bit better. It has to be significantly better. And I'm so glad that staff was out there to watch, particularly by Las Lomas, to see the students coming in and out of class, because that's when you have, like you said, 15 or 20 minutes. It's like this huge spike, but that's when the kids are exposed. That's when they're most at risk. And we have to build this to adjust to that fact. And hopefully these students are going to be more likely to bike and walk if we make it safer. Their parents will feel safer about it. They'll feel more comfortable. And so that has to be something we anticipate will happen. So just want to say, staff, thank you for doing a great job with this proposal, getting some funding. I know not all the cities around us got funding, so we may not have gotten everything we wanted, but at least we got several millions of dollars. So that is, from my perspective, definitely something that the staff earned with a well-developed plan that was aggressive and progressive, and that earn that those grant dollars. So yeah, thank you very much.
All right, thank you for being here. Danny's a former commissioner, so you can share that. Okay, is there anybody else on Zoom?
That is everyone.
All right. Are there any comments from commissioners? Yes, youth member.
I am really hopeful for this Safe Routes to School, especially as more funding is sought. And I believe that this will improve safety for students as well as the pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers in school areas, especially seeing that photo around Las Lomas of the large group of students mixed with the pedestrians and cyclists just squeezed onto the corner, and just seeing them overflowing off the sidewalk and into the road, combined with the traffic around these areas. So as a student, I am really excited to see this progress. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Commissioner Reese.
Yeah, I guess first of all, I'll say I'm disappointed that we can never seem to fund our safety projects. We always run into these problems where we need 8 million and we only get 2. And so we have to make these decisions, which is really unfortunate. However, this is an excellent project. I've made the mistake of driving through that area around school times and even non-school times, and there's always a lot of pedestrians that are having to cross 2 legs of the intersection. If you have people that are concerned about the increased delay that you showed with the vehicle traffic, you might go ahead and do a calculation of the increase or the decrease in delay associated with the pedestrian traffic, because what you'll see, I think, is that the pedestrian traffic will see a benefit probably on the order of magnitude that you see deterioration going from level of service C to E. That delay is probably about the amount of savings in time that pedestrians will have using that intersection. And so all we're doing is we're just rebalancing. We're just saying, okay, we're going to just rebalance and provide a benefit to the pedestrian that is equivalent to the degradation that we're causing the vehicles. And so who gets priority there? I say safety gets priority, and that's a pedestrian. The other issue I would say is that you showed the level of service, but you heard from a couple of speakers about and you saw in the pictures, those pedestrians oftentimes are not standing on the sidewalk. They're actually standing in the gutter because there's no room on the sidewalk for them to stand. And so that makes it even harder for drivers to get through the area because they have to negotiate around a pedestrian that is basically in the roadway. So this is a really important project. However you get that diagonal crossing in, that to me is the #1 priority of all of the elements in that intersection if you run into funding and constructability issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Reese. Commissioner Salcido.
I think a lot of great comments have already been made by some of our public commenters and Youth Commissioner Yao and Commissioner Reese. But just to add, I am very supportive of the work that staff has done on this project. I think it's great, and it sort of addresses what we were talking about earlier with connectivity, which is wonderful to see. And I love the pedestrian scramble. I just like what it's called. And I also appreciate the detail of, I think they were little horseshoes on the diagonal crosswalk to kind of reflect the Iron Horse Trail, so I appreciated that detail. But for real, I think it could be an interesting opportunity to incorporate some sort of public art in the paving of the design, especially because it will be a pedestrian scramble. And not only does that add to the beauty of our city, but it can also help calm traffic to have some interest on the ground plane. So I think that might be something to consider, but I think it's a great project and love it.
All right, thank you. I concur. I think it's a fabulous project. I really love scrambles. And every time I can enter a scramble and use a scramble, it fills me with joy. So there's that. As far as some concerns around traffic impacts and things like that and parent pickups at the schools, like maybe there's, something that the city and the school can maybe do to possibly look at alternative pickup sites or something like that to just help that issue a bit. But overall, I think that the safety benefits outweigh anything else in this, and I'm really excited about the project. Sorry you guys didn't get more funding, but thank you for throwing everything out there and trying. I'm happy that we got this, and I'm happy to see this project move forward. So that's it. Thank you. Okay, we are moving on to our last item of the night. This is going down in the books as one of our longest meetings ever, I think. Item D. Let's see, so this is an item for consideration. The Walnut Creek City Council will establish its priorities for the next 2 years at their February 28th, 2023 goal-setting session. To inform the council's process, each city commission is being asked to provide input about their respective ideas for 2023 to 2025. Is there a staff presentation for this? Yes?
Yeah, so there's no presentation. I'm just going to kind of set up the framework, ground rules, and then really the intent of this is that it's supposed to be a discussion to throw out your ideas. And what I will do, my job, is to compile your ideas. Hopefully there's some bucketing of those ideas, and then that information will be shared at the mayor's breakfast, which is tomorrow morning. We're the last commission to be providing this kind of input, so that's fun. And then the council will take that input at their February 28th retreat to discuss and set those council priorities. So this is your opportunity to provide that input. So quickly, what I wanted to go over and remind you of, which is, it's in your packet, but the 5 priorities that the council had set for the previous 2 years, they were these five strategic priorities. So that included diversity, equity, and inclusion, economic development and COVID recovery, environmental sustainability and climate action, infrastructure and facilities, social wellness, and public safety. And each one of those bullets really does have a little bit more detail associated with them. I'm happy to answer questions as I can for what was included as part of that. But setting the ground rules, if there's something about any of these existing priorities that you think, yes, these should continue to be priorities for the council, you can absolutely provide that input. If you think that maybe there's like a sub-bullet to one of those priorities that you think, oh yeah, actually, I have this idea, or I think we should be focusing on this other idea, maybe it's part of, it would fall under that. But it could also be a completely new priority. So with that, I would just turn it over to Sam or to Chair Cagle. And if you can just go ahead and allow the commissioners to provide their input. And then again, I'll just be taking notes. And then if you have any questions or just need any clarification, I will do my best to answer those questions.
Okay. So I think we'll start with, are there any questions of the commissioners about this process, about any of the outlined priorities we have here, any of the reports that you received, et cetera? Doesn't look like it. Okay. I had one question, and it's in reading through this, the October 11th report that went to the City Council that we were provided as background. Under the Economic Development and COVID Recovery section, it notes a economic development action plan that's going to be developed. And that is anticipated to be completed in spring of 2023. So I was just curious if there are elements in there that might relate to the Transportation Commission, because I think that there probably will be. If we could have some sort of briefing or update on that report or that plan, I think it'd be interesting for us to have if we could have that.
I am not sure if it contains anything specifically about transportation, but we can, staff can look into that, and then if there's anything relevant, because I'm not exactly sure what that economic development plan is really covering. So we can provide you an update, though, if it's relevant.
Okay, thank you. And then, so at this point, is there anyone in the public who would like to provide public comment on this? Not in the audience. How about online?
There are no raised hands on Zoom.
Okay. So are there any comments from our commissioners? Commissioner Reese?
Yeah. So we've had a lot of change in the last few years. There's been a lot of political change, a lot of change with COVID and everything. And what we've seen, though, in California is a lot of policy changes, and federal. We saw the LRSP, the Vision Zero, the safe systems, the new federal funding around safety. But we've also, within California, we've seen a lot of changes, legislative changes around housing, around land use, around environmental issues. We've even changed the way that we evaluate transportation in our environmental studies. And safety I had mentioned. And I'm concerned that Walnut Creek has some fairly dated documents that really don't reflect all of these changes that have been happening. And I'm excluding COVID and whether or not we're in a new normal or it's going to go back to the way it was. That's an unknown. That's for testing and poking at to see how resilient our plans are. But if our plans are old, like our general plan and like our bike plan, as two examples, they don't reflect what has been happening at the state level over the last few years. And I feel like we are putting together action plans and we're putting together focused plans, but we are not really addressing the elephant in the room, which is the general plan, and how the general plan really helps frame how our community is going to look in 20 years. And I feel like these ideas that the council have, the one place where they can get vetted and we can move forward is in the general plan process. That works both on the land use side. It helps Planning Commission in their work. It helps us, Transportation Commission, in our work. It sets a vision. It's a way of us really being able to think into the future. And I feel like that needs to be a priority. I don't know if it's a separate priority or if it's an implementation that takes the other 4 or 5 priorities and implements them through the general plan. But I really feel that that we need a new general plan, and we need a new vision, an expanded vision of what we want our city to be. And so I would ask that the council consider that and fund it. Thank you.
Commissioner Salcido.
I feel like it's a lot to respond to, but I do. The one thing that I feel was not super clear from the documents that I've seen were, how do we know that we've been successful at addressing these priorities? And there aren't really clear key performance indicators or specific measures that we're looking at when we're identifying these priorities. And I'm in particular familiar with the diversity, equity, and inclusion priority since I've been on the task force, and it has felt a bit weak in terms of accountability. And I think there's a lot more that we could do, and I've tried to kind of infuse that into the way that I look at things as a commissioner on this commission. But I'd like to see that really be brought to the forefront on a lot of the different policy issues that we take a look at as a city. And because of some of the reasons that I've mentioned earlier in related to where the harm is happening to different populations. And also, I feel like there was a little bit of there were a lot of opportunities for engagement with the housing element. I still feel like even with all of the outreach and engagement and workshops that happened that were available to the public, that there could have been more that was done in terms of finding new ways to engage with the community, to really have it be easier for people who maybe don't normally participate in the public process to be able to have a voice in some of these discussions. Because it's not always, it does sometimes feel opaque to certain members of the community. And I think we heard a little bit of that tonight with some of the, I know that from reports that we've heard from staff that there's been tons of outreach about what's going on with Homestead Avenue and Walnut Boulevard, but there are still people who felt like they didn't hear about it. And so I don't know exactly what the solution is, but I think we need to consider new ways of communicating with people to ensure that communication is actually effective, because just checking the box on doing communications and outreach doesn't always actually achieve the intended engagement. And I think they're really looking at even a neighborhood level. How are we performing? What does our city look like, and why? I think is important. And I think housing we're in a housing crisis. And I know we just adopted a housing element, but I still think that there are things to look at, because there's housing and transportation are so intertwined. And if we continue to have concerns about traffic, prevent us from developing certain areas of the city, but those areas of the city that are lower density and more car-oriented, because they're less dense, they can't really support transit, or there's not as much funding that's going into those areas because we're not redeveloping them. So it makes it more difficult to find the funding to support safety improvement projects and things like that, because you don't have a development partner who's going to help you fund those improvements. So I think really thinking more deeply about DEI in terms of how that really hits the ground, in terms of building our city and reshaping it, and not just kind of, I think that building a welcoming and inclusive community, that sounds fantastic. I don't know what role the city plays in all of that. I think it does play a role, but there are other things from a policy perspective where the city can really have an impact. And I feel like we've fallen short on some of those things. So continuing to push on that for DEI. I would love to see things like, when it comes to public safety, I would love to see Vision Zero be something that the city adopts, and thinking about systemically how we improve safety, not so much these temporary interventions that are over-reliant on the police department, and how are we able to create a safe community without always relying on that type of enforcement? Because I think sometimes when we hear public safety, we think increasing the police budget. So, which is not personally where I would prioritize our budgetary spending. I think staff has presented a lot of great transportation projects that I would love to see funded, and I think there's a lot of money that's available. It's just getting funneled to certain areas, and so really making safety a priority, I think, would help us to be able to justify that spending.
All right, thank you. Youth Member Yauta, do you have any comments before I go? Okay. So in looking at, what the city did for last year, DEI, I think is something that should be a continued priority. And like we talked about a little bit tonight, that consideration with each project that we look at from a transportation perspective, and hopefully from a citywide perspective. I have this dream of, the term like complete streets. I have this dream of like a complete communities concept that looks at our community from like a holistic level of almost like little micro communities within Walnut Creek, and maybe focusing on how to build those communities so that people have access to all of their needs. So maybe it's looking at Walnut Creek and kind of dividing it up almost into little sections, and making sure that, the grocery stores and schools and whatever people need to access on a regular basis can be accessed via various modes of transportation. So I don't know how you put that into a priority, but overall, that as a concept could probably be folded into a lot of these that were identified in last year's. So I think that's all that I have for now.
Okay, great. And then does anybody want to add anything? This is, again, it's a open forum. I'm going to go ahead and try and summarize, and you let me know if I'm completely off base or if I missed anything. What I heard was general plan update. Yes. I think related to what Chair Cahill was mentioning, it's this terminology. It's called like a 15-minute community or a 15-minute neighborhood. So I think that's something that would probably be associated with that general plan type of topic, just because it's related to some of the land uses and the transportation. I heard DEI, continuing on DEI, and then Vision Zero as part of public safety as a focus. And then one other one, I guess this could be a new one, or maybe it's something that's part of the other priorities, but transparent communication and like better community engagement strategies, or more inclusive community engagement strategies. And let's see. And then the key performance indicators for these policies, and I guess ensuring like monitoring, ongoing monitoring, or showing with the key performance indicators that you're making progress. Anything that I missed? Yes.
Does that round it up?
And I neglected to identify climate action, which is definitely something that I think should be a top priority, continue to be a top priority. And I think in particular, transportation plays a huge role in that.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Reese.
Yeah, I would. I think that's a good summary. I think that the other commissioners identified some real vision of what do we want our community to be, and that's across all lines: the Vision Zero, the 15-minute community, and it's how do we get there? And so I think that there's maybe for the council, there's two areas. One is the vision that my commissioners identified, and then the follow-on question is how do we implement that? What's the tool that we use to implement that? And maybe that's the general plan process. Maybe there's another way to do it, but I agree with the visions that you all have identified. I mean, that's what I'm trying to get at is what is the vision of our community?
Youth member Yao.
I definitely agree, and I really like all these priorities, and especially as part of the Transportation Commission, we've done a lot about like public safety, making sure that transportation is safe. But one thing that I think we have to focus more on is the climate action, because like a bunch of CO2 emitted by like cars and stuff. And so I feel like we've definitely, we're progressing towards public safety, and I would definitely like to see more environmental sustainability and climate action being included.
Great, thank you. Any other comments before we move on? All right. Huh?
We have more.
Okay. So then we'll move on to item number 5, commissioners' announcements and brief reports on activities. Do any commissioners have reports on activities or announcements? No? Staff?
Yes. Okay. Briefly, we did have some public comment earlier regarding the speed cushion pilot program. So this is part of it's the Neighborhood Streets program is the branding for this program. It's essentially a neighborhood traffic calming program. We've come to the commission previously about this topic. It's been a while, but now following several rounds of resident feedback, quite a few were on Zoom during the pandemic, and it actually really started prior to the pandemic, so this is kind of a long time coming with staff working on this. We are going to be we're working on implementing speed cushions on Walnut Boulevard north of Ignacio Valley Road, and then also in the Homestead community so that's south of Ignacio Valley Road on Walnut Boulevard and Homestead. And Matt Redman is leading the Homestead community portion, and Brianna Byrne is leading the Walnut Boulevard north, but everything is working, they're both working in coordination with each other on this. We expect that program to be implemented for a 6-month trial period, and during that time period, we'll be collecting data. So speed data, and also, so we have radar feedback signs in those locations so we can collect actual data points from speeds from vehicles that are on the road. We also can leverage big data, so using some of these larger sources of data that can also provide speed information. Okay, so another item is I just wanted to let you know about how many resident requests we get in traffic engineering, just for fun. So I did give an update on this, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago or something, but we received 150 during 2020. So just keep that in mind. That was pandemic, right? Very much so. In 2021, we got 205 requests from our residents. And in 2022, we got 276. So we're on an upward trend. I will say, I think about at least 20% plus are traffic safety related. We do, we categorize all this information using tracking software, and we're able to categorize the requests. So I just want to give you an update on that. And then we also have a new staff member under traffic engineering. We now have a transportation planner who we stole from our lovely planning division in the community development department. So we will continue our work on transportation planning projects, and now we will have some additional help too. So you will see a new face around, hopefully at the next meeting or in a few.
What great news. Thank you. All right, I hereby adjourn. Item number 6, our February 16th, 2023 special meeting of the Transportation Commission. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 16th, 2023.